Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel, where today we're going to be exploring one of history's most tantalising questions. What if the 9/13 days Queen, Lady Jane Grey, had survived? Before we venture into this alternative history or what-ifery, let's establish what actually happened to this remarkable young woman who found herself unwittingly at the centre of Tudor power politics. Lady Jane Grey was born in 1537 to Henry Grey, Marquess of Dorset, and Lady Frances Brandon. While traditionally thought to have been born at Bradgate Park in Leicestershire, historian Leander de Lisle has suggested that she may have actually been born in London in May of that year. Her mother, Frances, was the daughter of Mary Tudor, the younger sister of King Henry VIII, giving Jane royal blood and placing her in the Tudor line of succession. From an early age, Jane was raised to be exceptional. She received a Renaissance humanist education typically reserved for male heirs. By the age of 9, she was studying Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Italian, and French. Her tutor, John Almer, later described her as having the wit of a man and the soul of a Christian. But Jane's intellectual gifts would become overshadowed by her religious and political turmoil of Tudor England. She was a committed Protestant at a time when religious identity could determine one's survival. And her parents? Well, they were ambitious to say the least. In 1547, King Henry VIII died, leaving the throne to his 9-year-old son, Edward VI. Jane, around 10 years old at this time, was sent to live in the household of Edward's stepmother, Catherine Parr, where she continued her education and strengthened her Protestant convictions. Notably, Jane would have been educated alongside the Lady Elizabeth Tudor, who was also residing at Catherine Parr's household at this time. The two young women, both intellectually gifted and Protestant-leaning, may have formed a connection during this formative period. During this time, the Lady Mary, who had been declared illegitimate years earlier after Henry VIII's break with Rome and subsequent marriage to Anne Boleyn, remained steadfast in her Catholic faith, living separately from court life. During this period, Jane's father was elevated to Duke of Suffolk, increasing the family status. Jane herself became known for her piety and learning rather than court politics. But that was about to change dramatically. By 1553, the young King Edward was dying of tuberculosis. His advisor, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, faced a serious problem. The heir, according to Henry VIII's will, was Edward's half-sister Mary, a devoted Catholic who would most likely and actually did reverse Edward's Protestant reforms. Northumberland convinced the dying king to exclude both Mary and Elizabeth from the succession in favour of Lady Jane Grey, who just so happened to be recently married to Northumberland's son, Guildford Dudley. Talk about convenient. Take it away, Bernie.
Coincidence? I think not!
Edward VI died on the 6th of July 1553. 4 days later, Lady Jane Grey, just 16 years old, was proclaimed Queen of England. Historical accounts suggest she fainted when she was told of her new position. Jane never wanted the crown. She was a pawn in a dangerous political game. And it's worth noting that technically Jane became queen the moment Edward died on the 6th of July, making her reign 13 days rather than 9, even though she wasn't publicly proclaimed queen until the 10th. Jane's reign lasted just 13 days. Support for Lady Mary grew quickly, and Northumberland's schemes collapsed. On the 19th of July, Mary was proclaimed queen. Jane and her husband were imprisoned in the Tower of London. Initially, Queen Mary seemed inclined towards leniency. Jane and Guildford remained in the Tower, but were treated well. Mary likely understood that Jane had been manipulated by powerful men including her own parents. But then came Sir Thomas Wyatt's rebellion in January 1554. Wyatt led an uprising against Queen Mary's planned marriage to Philip of Spain. Crucially, Jane's own father, Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, was involved in this rebellion, effectively sealing his daughter's fate. Although Jane herself had nothing to do with this uprising, her very existence became dangerous to Mary. With Protestant rebels, including Jane's own father, trying to overthrow the Catholic Queen, Jane became too great of a risk. On the 12th of February 1554, Lady Jane Grey and her husband were executed. Jane, still only 16 or 17 years old, died with remarkable dignity. Her final words on the scaffold reportedly included a recitation of Psalm 51. "Have mercy upon me, O God," and the declaration, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." And that is what actually happened. But when we do a little bit of what-ifery, things tend to go different. So what if Wyatt's rebellion had succeeded and Lady Jane Grey had been restored to the throne? I just want to note that when doing this story, I could have deviated from history a lot earlier and have Mary's effort to claim the throne in July 1553 fail. However, I think if you consider how popular Mary was and the fact that she was the people's princess, I don't think splitting the story there would have been very viable. Whereas, what if the Wyatt Rebellion succeeded, I think is slightly more intriguing and plausible. Also, here is a warning that everything from now on is fiction and is essentially fan fiction because it comes from my brain. Also, for those of you who don't know, and I can't believe I have to actually explain this, fiction means it's made up, not real. It's a story. I can't believe I actually have to define that, like seriously. But I did a what if ages ago and somebody on the comments section told me that I was wrong. And then when I explained to them that fiction means it's fake, it's a story, they then deleted their comments because they realised how much of a muppet they made themselves. Right, we all on the same page? Yeah? Sandra, do you understand what fiction means? Becky with the good hair? Yeah, you cool? We all good with me carrying on? Great. Let's explore this alternative history. February 1554. London is in chaos. Sir Thomas Wyatt's rebellion, unlike in our actual history, has gained momentum as his forces successfully enter London. Queen Mary's support collapses as news spreads that Spanish troops would arrive with Prince Philip for the marriage. The xenophobic fears that Wyatt have stoked prove effective. Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, Jane's father, leads a successful uprising in the Midlands, declaring his daughter the rightful queen. As Mary's loyalists desert her, she attempts to flee to imperial territories, but is captured. The Tower of London, where Jane has been held prisoner, becomes her sanctuary as rebel forces liberate her. The rebels proclaim Jane in the Tower of London as Queen of England. Jane, now 17 and having spent months contemplating her mortality in the Tower, emerges a changed woman. Her scholarly reluctance is tempered by a new sense of divine purpose. In this alternate history, she accepts the crown not out of ambition, but from conviction that England must remain Protestant. We know from history that although Jane may have been reluctant to take the crown, that she did equally appreciate and respect her royal blood and place in the line of succession. And I think now that she's been made queen a second time, she fully embraces the being of Tudor blood. Like, I am a Tudor through and through, this is who I am, this is my throne. And this is seen when Guildford Dudley, in the original timeline, expects and wants Jane to make him king consort, but she refuses, knowing full well it is her and her birthright alone, not Guildford's. And like in the original timeline, Guildford is offered the consolation prize of a dukedom rather than consort. Queen Jane's first acts are politically shrewd. She issues a proclamation pardoning most of Mary's supporters while establishing her legitimacy based on Edward VI's device for the succession. Mary herself is not executed but confined to a remote castle under guard, Jane having learned from Mary's mistake of initial leniency. The Lady Elizabeth presents an interesting challenge. In our actual history, Elizabeth was masterful at surviving tumultuous times by keeping her head down and conforming when necessary, as she did during the reigns of her father, brother, and sister Mary. Elizabeth would likely do the same under Jane's rule. Jane summons Elizabeth to court, wary of her Tudor cousin, but recognising her lineage. Elizabeth, ever the pragmatist, publicly pledges loyalty to Queen Jane while carefully maintaining her own position in the succession. Unlike Mary, who was seen as the rightful heir by many, Elizabeth's claim had always been complicated by questions of her mother's marriage and her own legitimacy. Elizabeth pledges her loyalty to Jane, and this is what she said. Are you ready for this Oscar bit of acting? Ready? Your Majesty, I live to serve the rightful Queen, as God has ordained. I ask only for your protection and favour as your loyal subject and cousin. Yay!
I did it! Yay me!
You're welcome. I want an Oscar, please. BAFTA, thank you for this nomination. Didn't expect to win. Jane plays up and makes sure that everyone remembers that Elizabeth is an illegitimate child of Henry VIII. I mean, we know she's not, but Jane parades the fact that Elizabeth's mother was a traitor and that Anne's marriage to Henry was annulled prior to her execution. Jane can see it hurts Elizabeth, but it's the only way to dampen the threat without executing Elizabeth. On the flip side, Jane parades her own legitimacy and how her grandmother was the Queen of France, sister to King Henry VIII, and that her great-grandfather was the brilliant King Henry VII, making her a true Tudor heir, princess and queen. Jane, remembering their shared education under Catherine Parr and their common Protestant faith, keeps Elizabeth close, both as an ally and to monitor her activities, much like how Elizabeth did to Jane's sister, Catherine Grey, in the original timeline during her reign. And this is another thing that works in Jane's favour. Jane has a husband, Guildford. She's young and able to provide heirs, and she has a younger sister, well, 2 younger sisters, which is a lot more promising than the old Lady Mary, who was running out of baby-making years, and the Lady Elizabeth, who, unbeknownst to them, would go on to be known as the Virgin Queen. The international reaction is swift. Emperor Charles V and Pope Julius III condemn the overthrow of the Catholic Queen Mary. Philip of Spain abandons his marriage plans and begins plotting with European Catholic powers to restore Mary. France, seeing an opportunity to prevent a Spanish-English alliance, offers recognition and support to Queen Jane. Meanwhile, Jane's government faces the challenge of consolidating power. Sir Thomas Wyatt and other rebel leaders expect rewards, while Jane's father, Henry Grey, becomes one of the most powerful men in England. By summer of 1554, Queen Jane faces her first crisis. Catholic uprisings in the north, likely supported by Spanish gold, threaten her rule. She responds not with her cousin Mary's leniency, but with swift military action. Jane appoints capable Protestant nobles to suppress the rebellion, including her brother-in-law, the ambitious Robert Dudley. Unlike in our actual history, where Mary's religious persecutions would soon begin, Jane establishes a moderate Protestant settlement, influenced both by her scholarly understanding of theology and practical political necessity. Jane reverses a lot of Mary's Catholic policies, and it is closer to the reign of King Edward VI, who, don't forget, was also a staunch Protestant. Jane's marriage becomes a matter of urgent state business. As she is married to a subject, which is not ideal, Parliament would prefer that she wed a Protestant prince to create powerful alliances. Although, after Mary's unpopular match to a foreign prince, maybe this wasn't so bad. Much to Guildford's disdain, he was made prince consort, not king consort, or co-ruler. As we know in the original timeline, like I said earlier, Jane refused to elevate Guildford to king, and I don't see why she would change her mind now. Plus, the only queen regnants to have given their husbands the title of king were Mary I and Mary II, although in the latter's case it was a co-monarchy, as Queen Anne, Queen Victoria, and Queen Elizabeth II all made their husbands prince consort to ensure that they didn't outrank them. I also think Jane's refusal to make Guildford king consort puts a strain on their relationship. I'm kind of like thinking a relationship similar to that of Mary Queen of Scots and Lord Darnley, except Guildford isn't an alcoholic and just busies himself with mistresses and sport, and I think him and Jane would have moments of joint decision, and she would ask for counsel, but only when she sees fit. I can also see Guildford being given a role of heading up the army and being in charge of that, so again, he does have something to do. By 1558, the year when Mary Tudor actually died in our timeline, Jane's rule has stabilised. The Lady Elizabeth has proven herself a valuable, if closely watched, member of Jane's government. With her practical political instincts complementing Jane's intellectual and theological focus, the two form an effective partnership, though not without tensions. The death of Mary Tudor in captivity in 1558 creates a moment of crisis. Spanish and imperial forces make one final attempt to overthrow Jane in favour of, this time, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, the Catholic claimant. But the attempt fails, partly due to Elizabeth's unexpected loyalty. The Lady Elizabeth, recognising her precarious position if Catholic forces were to prevail, throws her full support behind Jane. By 1560, Queen Jane's England has emerged as Europe's leading Protestant power. Her marriage has produced two heirs, securing the Tudor Grey succession. The religious settlement under Jane, more scholarly and principled than Elizabeth's actual pragmatic approach, creates a distinctly English Protestant identity. Unlike our actual history's Elizabeth, who famously declared she had no desire to make windows into men's souls, Jane establishes a more defined theological position, though stopping short of extreme Puritanism. I think in this timeline, as she is not next in line to the throne, I think Elizabeth does get married. Now, I know we can argue that part of the reason she doesn't marry as queen was down to her father's treatment of her mother. Like, I get it, it's all very valid. However, we do know that Elizabeth had a soft spot for Robert Dudley, and had she married, it would have been to him. I think it would have happened after Amy Robsart's death in 1560. You've got to remember, in the original timeline, Robert did make a big display to try and get Elizabeth to marry him. But as queen, she couldn't be seen to marry a subject. Although it's slightly different for Jane, as her and Guildford were indeed married prior to her queenship. I also think that what with her and Jane having this bond together, Robert being Jane's brother-in-law, I think Elizabeth would have actually had the support, if not the encouragement, from the Queen. And also, as far as Jane's concerned, she's got a loyal family member, Robert, keeping a close eye on a not so trustful family member, Elizabeth. I also think that Jane would have married off both her sisters. More specifically, I think her sister Catherine Grey would have been married on to a Dutch prince. I know Catherine was married to Henry Herbert, but I'm going to say it got annulled in 1554, like in the original timeline. But this time it was annulled because Jane was in the Tower and Herbert just didn't want his son associated with the bad press, and her sister because obviously the rebellion, and yeah, it's just too much drama for the Herberts. And I have found the perfect prince for Catherine Grey. William the Silent, Prince of Orange. Catherine was born in 1540, William in 1533, so he was the same age as her cousin, the Lady Elizabeth. So a bit older, but to be honest, in Tudor England, that's hardly too bad, right? I mean, Catherine Willoughby and Charles Brandon, anyone? And William had been married to Anna of Egmond. However, she died in 1558 in the original timeline, and William did not marry again until 1561, which means he's a single Protestant Pringle in 1560. So, Catherine Grey, you are the new Princess of Orange. Congrats. And she leaves to never see her family again.
Say what?
The Spanish Armada still comes in 1588, but faces a more united Protestant England with German allies, as Jane writes her sister in Orange, who at this point is the Dowager Queen of Orange, having made close bonds with her stepchildren. Why? Because it's convenient and it's my story. Philip II's Grand Catholic Crusade fails even more spectacularly than in our actual history. As our alternative history draws to a close, we might imagine Jane Grey dying in her 60s in around 1600. Having ruled for nearly half a century, she would be remembered not as the 9-Day Queen, but as Jane the Learned or Jane the Pious, the reluctant monarch who became one of England's most consequential rulers. The Tudor Grey dynasty would continue through her children, creating a different trajectory for England's development. The Lady Elizabeth, dying a few years after Jane, would be remembered as the greatest stateswoman never to wear the crown. Her political genius is acknowledged, but always in the service of her queen, Jane. Mary, Queen of Scots, would likely never have set foot in England, altering the course of Scottish history, although not by much, as James would have still taken the throne, just the nations of Scotland and England would not be united. And the English Reformation, guided by Jane's scholarly precision rather than Elizabeth's pragmatic compromises, would have produced a more coherent theological foundation for the Church of England. And so we end our exploration of what if the Wyatt Rebellion succeeded. History often turns on such small moments. A rebellious victory rather than defeat, a different decision in a moment of crisis. The real Lady Jane Grey's tragic fate denied England the contributions of one of its most educated and thoughtful young women. But in considering what might have been, we gain a deeper appreciation for what actually was. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you next time. Have a wonderful day. Bye.